There once was a time where fathers really cared about how their daughters dressed and how they behaved around men. The primary reason why these fathers cared was because they knew that not all men could be trusted. A few decades later, and now our generation, and fathers don't really care how their daughters dress or behave around men. But unlike our fathers today and those of old, God is also a father who does not change, but remains the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he still cares about how his daughters dress and how they act around men because he loves us and wants to protect us. Waiting to have sex until marriage is not enslavement, it's safety. It's protection, and it kind of used to be common sense for the vast majority of individuals. Unwanted pregnancies that oftentimes lead to abortion, STDs, higher suicide rates, higher depression. These are things that God does not want for his daughters. Sure, waiting until marriage does not protect you from all of these things all the time, but it sure increases your chances of avoiding these things. If a man cannot wait for you until marriage, and he has to have you now, and he really just loves you and wants to be with you so badly now, what's greater, his love for you or his lust for you? Because the Bible does tell us in 1 Corinthians 13 that love, number one, suffers long. What is a better indicator of love? I love you so much, I'm going to wait and suffer long because I want to obey God and I want to protect your heart, your emotions, and your body. Or I really can't wait for those things. My love is kind of conditional. If we don't do this now, then I'm out. And what happens if a man doesn't wait for you and you do happen to get married? Because when you have sex before marriage or cohabitate before marriage, the chances of you getting married are dramatically decreased. But in the case that you do marry this guy, what if something happens to you and you are incapable of having sex for a time? Like an accident. True story. I know a couple who are Christians. The man thankfully waited for his wife because immediately after they got married, she got into a car accident and of all places, busted her hips. For 2 months, more, this brother had to wait. Sure, he said it was a struggle, but he was able to do so. Why? Because before they got married, he was able to control himself and walk in honor, as 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 says, that God desires his children to not walk in lust and lack of self-control like the pagans do. God wants us to walk in sanctification and honor and in self-control over our vessels, over our bodies. So this man was able to wait. Now, what would have happened if he couldn't wait for her and they had sex before marriage? Those 2 months, do you think that that woman, that sister would have been at peace every time her husband walked out of the door? Sure, maybe for a time, but after he started portraying signs of really wanting to be with her and knowing he couldn't, where would that peace have gone? I don't know, he couldn't wait for me before marriage, he pressured me into sex before marriage. Where is he right now? My husband waited for me. And if my husband could wait for me, denying himself, obeying what Jesus told us to do, which is those who want to follow me, pick up your cross, deny yourself. If he was able to do that, a man, a young one at that, 20 to 21 years old, from the time that we started dating, then what excuse does the man you're with have? Sorry, I have no self-control, I have no patience for you, and my love for you is conditional, so let's have sex. Is that the kind of man you want to marry anyway? A man who has no self-control? A man who couldn't even wait for you, the girl that he's supposedly so in love with, that he's willing to pledge his life to? He couldn't even wait for you. So how difficult will it be after marriage for him to refrain from having sex with another girl? If something were to happen to you, or if not even something were to happen to you. If this man's love for you is conditional and sex before marriage is conditional, if he cannot wait until that day, or at least hasten the day because he's like, look, I'm struggling, we need to get married sooner rather than later, even that shows a little bit more honor than a guy who doesn't even care. If he can't respect your father by obeying his words not to touch you until marriage, what makes you think deep down he really loves you in a holy way? Or is he just consumed with lust for you? Sure, not everyone is perfect, but there are certain standards that God requires for his children, and they don't shift with the shifting and rather declining morale of the culture. God's standards in holiness don't decrease over time. They never have, and they never will. But Natasha, how can I do it in a sex-saturated culture? Are you kidding me? It is nearly impossible not to have sex before marriage. False. If you do things the world's way, yeah, it's nearly impossible not to have sex before marriage. But if you do things God's way, it's actually a lot easier than you would think. Easy common sense tips: don't be alone with the guy. Don't date for longer than a year. Don't date, period, if you're not even ready for marriage. We've been sold these lies that we need to be this age, we need to have this degree under our belt, we need to have all this, that, and the other in order to get married and start a family. When in reality, we're just pushing the age back more and more. Within another decade, it'll be 40-year-olds. And by that point, the older you get, the higher the chances are that you're gonna have risks and complications in your pregnancy. Don't you think the way that God designed us kind of indicates round about when we should be married and having children? I would say definitely in the 20s, even 18 and up, if you are mature. And here's the thing, our society is purposefully trying to make us immature and childlike. The video games and things that we do now, back then, no, these things weren't available. Kids were actually doing chores and working with their parents and picking up trades and being responsible and caring for children. They weren't as immature as a lot of our young people are today. If you want to be able to enjoy the pleasures of sex and eventually have children, then actually start planning for that. Don't set yourself up for sexual sin. Set yourself up for spiritual success. Also, don't date a guy who's not ready. And one of the biggest indicators is if he cannot keep his hands off of you. Yes, he also needs a stable job. And contrary to popular belief, he doesn't need to make $100,000 a year in order to take care of a family. He just needs to be wise with what he has. But again, who are you listening to? The world or God? There is a man out there who's willing to wait for you. Are you willing to wait for him? Ladies, know your worth.